My fellow Americans, tonight I am speaking to you because there is a growing humanitarian and security crisis at our southern border.
Sadly, much of what we heard from President Trump throughout this senseless shutdown has been full of misinformation and even malice.
A crisis of the heart and a crisis of the soul.
This president just used the backdrop of the Oval Office to manufacture a crisis, stoke fear, and divert attention from the turmoil in his administration.
Tonight, the battle over the border wall spilling into prime time. The president making his case of a border crisis from the Oval Office. Top Democrats sharply rebutting him moments later.
Some have suggested a barrier is immoral. Then why do wealthy politicians build walls, fences, and gates around their homes? They don't build walls because they hate the people on the outside, but because they love the people on the inside.
All in the midst of a partial government shutdown, now grinding its way into an 18th day.
This was a subdued President Trump, a very conventional-looking President Trump who nonetheless looked very uncomfortable behind that desk. He recognized that his traditional bag of options as a presidential leader over these last 2 years, it simply wasn't working this time. He had to try something different. To my mind, it looked like a president who recognized that he's losing this.
The president doubling down on one of his biggest campaign promises.
Build the wall. We're going to build that wall. Believe me, folks, we're building the wall. Believe me.
Demanding $5.7 billion for a border wall and security, paving a way for the U.S. government to foot the bill.
Vastly more than the $5.7 billion we have requested from Congress. The wall will also be paid for indirectly by the great new trade deal we have made with Mexico.
There's nothing in this trade deal that tweaks the North America Free Trade Agreement, nothing in that has money from the Mexicans actually going to the U.S. Treasury to reimburse taxpayers.
Ignoring that promise to have Mexico pay.
Mexico's going to pay for the wall, and we're going to let people come into our country, and we want people to come into our country, but they're going to come into our country legally.
In the nearly 10-minute address, he described the border as a pipeline for criminal activity.
It's a tremendous problem.
Central to his address, the issue of drugs coming across the southern border into the country.
Every week, 300 of our citizens are killed by heroin alone, 90% of which floods across from our southern border. More Americans will die from drugs this year than were killed in the entire Vietnam War.
And while America is in crisis due to the opioid epidemic, most of those illegal drugs are not being smuggled through gaps along the border.
Drugs that are smuggled into the country from the south and most often are smuggled in through the ports of entry themselves. Drug smugglers will use vehicles with concealed compartments.
My colleague Dan Harris saw the use of vehicles to smuggle drugs firsthand in Mexico.
Papel carbón y los emplean con agua y jabón para que no suelte la peste.
This is clearly not the first time he's done this.
And at the border earlier today, my colleague Matt Gutman gave us a sense of the scope of the growing wall.
Now, this is what the president has been talking about. This is actually a gate in the steel slats that the president has mentioned. And these are the steel slats. They're about 6 inches wide. I mean, it would take a tank to get through these. They're probably about 16 feet tall or so, maybe 20 feet. So climbing over would also be difficult. And this goes on for miles. It gets lower for some areas, but and even chain link fence in other areas.
But the wall is far from complete, the president blaming the Democrats.
Democrats in Congress have refused to acknowledge the crisis.
American democracy doesn't work that way. We don't govern by temper tantrum. President Trump has appealed to fear, not facts, division, not unity.
This shutdown has simply not gone the way that President Trump wanted. He thought that the pressure would build on Democrats. They would come back to him and that he could possibly get that key campaign promise of that border wall. Meanwhile, the scenes, the sights and the sounds and even the smells of the trash collecting, it's all been a very negative series of news cycles for the president and for this White House.
Trump suggesting that the shutdown could easily be fixed.
This situation could be solved in a 45-minute meeting. I have invited congressional leadership to the White House tomorrow to get this done. Hopefully, we can rise above partisan politics in order to support national security.
The fact is, on the very first day of this Congress, House Democrats passed Senate Republican legislation to reopen government and fund smart, effective border security solutions. But the president is rejecting these bipartisan bills which would reopen government.
The president stopped short of declaring a national emergency, but did call the situation a crisis.
Just because you call this a crisis doesn't necessarily make it a crisis. In fact, the fact checkers say the facts on this one are not there to back it up. But that's not stopping the president from seeming to lay the groundwork to declare this a national emergency.
In fact, since 2006, the number of people crossing the southern border illegally has declined, with a slight uptick in the last year.
This is the tragic reality of illegal immigration on our southern border. This is the cycle of human suffering that I am determined to end.
Just before the midterm election, about 5,900 troops were deployed to the southern border, part of an effort to combat the so-called caravan, thousands of migrants traveling north from countries in Central America to seek asylum in the U.S.
I don't care what the fake media says, that's an invasion of our country.
Currently, less than 2,400 remain, bolstered by the help of the National Guard, split between California, Arizona, and here in Texas. We traveled to Brownsville, Texas late last year to see if the fear and rhetoric out of the White House matched the experience on the ground.
They're not coming to hurt us. They're coming for a better life.
Elisa Filippone is a Texas native who has lived and worked in Brownsville for the last 17 years. The migrants seeking refuge here, she says, a world apart from the criminals painted by the White House.
They're coming for a place with running water, a place where they don't have to fear the police, a place where when their daughter gets raped, they can actually seek some justice. These are some medicines, ibuprofen and so forth.
Elisa is part of a local group of residents who've responded to the migrant crisis by volunteering their time, providing aid and assistance to asylum seekers.
It's also about that, about restoring a little bit of dignity.
A few blocks away, we meet Sergio Cordova and Mike Benavides, two other Brownsville locals.
And so we were walking around this area just thinking, why don't we start a kitchen there?
Inside is another Brownsville volunteer, Brendan Tucker.
No, she helps me out like buying things in Mexico.
Making meals for migrants stuck at the Mexican side of the border.
Is that it? We don't have anything else to take? It feels so light. We took everything yesterday.
We are with Sergio and his team. They have the dinner packed up, and then we are currently crossing over from Brownsville over to Mexico via the port of entry.
Just knowing that these asylum seekers are being received like this, the way that they should. They're being received in an American way, you know, with open arms. That's what America's all about. It always has been.
The range extends all the way to the river.
But for another Brownsville resident, Gilbert Garza, it's not so black and white.
When you have 1,000 people trying to come into any area, it's definitely something that will raise eyebrows and concerns on what's going to happen.
Garza manages a gun range here in town and says his clientele is divided on the issue of immigration.
We want productive people in society to come to the United States. As long as they go to the right channels, I'm not opposed to the people like that at all.
Tonight in Washington, far away from that border wall, a continued stalemate and increasing frustration as the shutdown looms heavy.
And the president is set to visit the border on Thursday.
Hi everyone, George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.